Ben's spoon scraped tin, the sound too loud in the empty kitchen. Third morning, same beans. The cornbread had gone stale yesterday, but soaking it in water made it edible enough. Through the window, dawn revealed what darkness had hidden another fence post listing sideways. Wire slack as old rope. 23 cattle where there should be hundreds. The mortgage notice sat beside his father's account ledger, both gathering dust. The tool shed door hung on one hinge. Inside, the thresher's main gear showed a hairline crack that would cost more than he had. The forge stood cold, unused since his father's death 2 winters back. In the drawer beneath his mother's wedding photograph. The marriage broker's letter waited, 3 weeks old now. The woman from St. Louis had accepted his proposal, sight unseen. Ben's ink-stained thumb hovered over the blank response paper. Send confirmation and change everything, or face the banker alone come Monday. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The razor caught twice on his jaw, drawing blood. Ben pressed his thumb against the nick, watching red seep into the cracks of his skin. The mirror showed what 3 months of eating beans had done cheekbones sharp enough to cut paper. Henderson's mare stood patient while Ben adjusted the borrowed saddle. Just this once, Henderson had said, not meeting his eyes. Everyone knew. Everyone waited to see if the Caldwell place would go under like the Turner spread last spring. Boot sole wearing thin, Ben felt every stone through the leather on the walk to Main Street. The stage depot already held a crowd. Tom Morrison stood with his arm around a blonde woman in blue silk, her tears leaving tracks through powder. The Jameson brothers flanked a severe woman in black bombazine who clutched a Bible against her chest. Ben's wildflowers, picked from beside the creek, had gone limp in the heat. He'd wrapped them in a page torn from last year's Sears catalog ladies' corsets and hairpins bleeding through where his palm sweated. The stage brake squealed. Dust rose thick enough to taste. Morrison's woman shrieked and launched herself into his arms. The Jameson woman permitted a brief embrace before stepping back, adjusting her collar. Last off the stage, brown serge dress, practical boots that had seen miles, no parasol. The woman's eyes swept the platform like she was counting fence posts. Her carpet bag showed wear at the corners. When she spotted him, the only man left standing alone, she didn't smile. Ben stepped forward. The wilted flowers trembled in his grip. Miss Margaret Foster. You're Ben. Not a question. Her gaze had already moved past him to the street, the storefronts, the horizon where his land started. Where's your wagon? I borrowed a horse. Thought it might be more. A wagon would be more practical for my trunk. She pointed to a battered case the stage driver was unloading. And those, 2 more boxes. Heavy ones. From how the driver grunted. Tools. Maybe. Ben had mentioned the forge in his letter, thinking it might make the place sound more prosperous. Margaret stood waiting, hands folded, while other couples embraced around them. No tears, no powder to run. The catalog page with the flowers had torn where his thumb pressed too hard. Mr. Caldwell, her voice carried the flat accent of Missouri bottomland. Should we discuss terms now, or after you've shown me what needs fixing? The borrowed wagon creaked with each rotation. Margaret's trunk and boxes secured with rope Ben had tested 3 times. She sat straight-backed on the bench beside him, her hands folded over a small leather journal she hadn't opened. No questions, no small talk, just her eyes tracking every detail of the collapsed fence line. The lean-to missing half its roof. The irrigating ditch choked with tumbleweeds. When they passed the Turner place, abandoned since spring, she made a small mark in her journal with a pencil stub. The house appeared around the bend. Ben's throat tightened, paint peeling from the porch posts, steps sagging where the supporting beam had given way. The kitchen garden his mother had tended now just dried stalks and blown dirt. Margaret climbed down before he could offer help. She tested the porch steps with her boot heel, finding the solid spots, before retrieving her carpet bag. At the door, she ran her palm along the frame where the wood had swollen, preventing it from closing proper. Inside, she moved through each room with the same methodical precision, opening cupboards, checking shelves, testing floorboards for rot with controlled pressure from her heel. In the pantry, she held each preserve jar to the window light, looking for cloudiness or broken seals. 3 jars of tomatoes had gone bad. She set them aside without comment. The pump handle in the kitchen required both hands to work. She pressed down, counting the strokes until water came. 7. Too many. The leather washers needed replacing. She cupped water in her palm, tasted it, then spit it into the basin. Iron. Too much iron. Ben stood in the doorway watching her inventory his failures. Each open drawer, each tested hinge mapped out exactly how far he'd let things slide. When she found the mousetrap in the flour bin still baited but rusted solid, she just set it on the counter and continued. The kitchen knives lay in the drawer, edges dull as fence posts. She tested each blade against her thumb, not hard enough to cut, just enough to gauge the metal's condition. The butcher knife had a chip near the handle. The paring knife's tip had broken off. The bread knife's teeth were worn smooth. "Supper," Ben said. "I have salt pork." She'd already found the crock, lifted the lid. "And beans. I saw the pot on the stove." He nodded. She moved to the stove, checking the damper, the ash level, the chimney draw. Her fingers came away black with soot. "When did you last clean this?" "Spring. Maybe." She struck a match from the box beside the stove. The flame guttered, struggling against poor draw. She adjusted the damper, tried again. This time it caught. While the stove heated, she unpacked items from her carpet bag. A sharp knife that caught the light like water, a small grater, a tin of something that rattled when she set it down. Salt, real salt, not the gray stuff from the general store. The salt pork sizzled when it hit the pan. She'd cut it thinner than he ever managed, each piece uniform. The beans from his pot she drained, then added to the pork fat with something from another tin black pepper. The smell made his stomach clench with want. They sat across from each other at the scarred table. She tested the chair's stability before settling, adjusting when it wobbled. The plate she'd served him held more food than he'd seen it once in weeks. She ate steadily, but her eyes were on the ledger he'd left open beside the salt cellar. "May I?" She'd finished half her plate. Ben pushed the ledger across. She studied it while chewing, her finger tracking down columns. The pencil stub appeared again. She made notes in the margins, crossing out his figures, adding new ones. "Your addition's off." Not an accusation, just fact. "Here, and here. You're showing $43 more than you actually have." The pork turned to sawdust in his mouth. $43. More than a month's earnings, if he had any earnings. The mortgage payment. She'd found that page. Due Monday. How much do you actually have? $26. Some change. You need 70? 75. There's interest. She returned to the ledger, pencil moving fast. Your cattle. 23 head. If none have wandered. Market price is $18 per head right now, but driving them to market costs $12 for the crew, another $8 for feed along the way. You'd clear roughly $300 after sale. The pencil tapped against her teeth. But not by Monday. No. Equipment. She'd found his inventory list. The thresher. Cracked gear. Forge. Haven't lit it since 2 winters. But it works. Should. If the bellows leather hasn't rotted. She closed the ledger, stood, walked to the window where the last light was fading. Her reflection in the glass showed nothing, just a silhouette against the dying day. "Mr. Caldwell?" She turned. "I need to see the forge." "Now it's nearly dark." "Now." She was already moving toward the door. "And bring the lamp. All the lamps. If you have more than one." The tool shed's broken door scraped ground when Ben forced it open. Margaret stepped past him into the darkness, not waiting for the lamplight. He heard her hands moving across the walls, finding tools by touch. Light. He brought the lamp close. The forge sat like a dead thing, covered in dust and mouse droppings. But Margaret was looking at the tools hanging on the walls. Her father's tools. She'd set at the depot. Now her hands moved across these ones, the hammers, the tongs, the files and punches, like she was reading a familiar book. She pulled down a hammer, hefted it, checking balance, then another, testing each edge with her thumb. "These are good tools." Her voice had changed. Something underneath the flat Missouri accent. German steel, Pittsburgh iron. Someone knew what they were doing. My father. He did some smithing, horseshoes, mostly. Simple repairs. Simple. She'd found something else, lifted it into the light. A piece Ben had never understood, intricate metalwork his father had been making before the sickness took him. "This is anything but simple." She set the piece down carefully, turned to face him. In the lamplight, her eyes were the color of hot metal. That moment just before it becomes workable. "Mr. Caldwell, I need you to answer honestly. If I can get this forge running, if I can generate income before Monday, will you let me try?" "Let you? I'm not the wife you advertised for. We both know that. But I might be what you need to keep this place." She gestured at the tools, the forge, the cold anvil. "This is what I know, what I've done since I was 12. My father's trade." Ben's throat closed around words he couldn't form. "So I'm asking?" Her voice steady as hammer strokes. "Will you let me try?" The lamp flickered, oil running low. In that moment of dimness, Ben saw something else in the shed, on the workbench, barely visible beneath dust and neglect. His father's account book, the real one, the one showing 3 times the debt he'd admitted. The hammer rang against iron before the rooster crowed. Ben jolted awake, blanket sliding to the floor, gray light through the window. The sound came again, metal on metal, steady as heartbeat. He pulled on yesterday's pants, yesterday's shirt. The kitchen stood empty. Coffee pot on the stove, already hot. 2 cups set out, the good one without chips for him. Through the window, smoke rose from the shed. Real smoke, not the dust that usually lifted when wind came through the broken door. Margaret had dragged the door off its ruined hinges, propped it against the outside wall. Inside, orange light danced. The forge lived again, coals glowing white at the edges. She stood before it in her brown dress, a leather apron tied over his father's apron, pulled from some hiding place Ben had forgotten existed. Sweat already darkened the fabric between her shoulder blades. Her sleeves were rolled past her elbows, showing forearms marked with old burn scars, small and round as coins. She held a piece of metal in the tongs, looked like part of Henderson's broken plow. The metal glowed cherry red. She pulled it from the fire, set it on the anvil. The hammer moved in her hand like it weighed nothing, each strike precise. The metal bent, shaped, responded. Ben knew forge work, had watched his father enough times. But this was different. His father had fought the metal, forced it into shape. Margaret conversed with it. Each hammer blow asked a question. The metal's color gave the answer. Back into the fire when it cooled, out when it glowed just right. "Coffee's ready," she said without turning. "Drink it while it's hot." He fetched both cups, set hers on the workbench within reach. She'd been up long enough to sort the tool wall. Hammers arranged by weight, tongs by length, files cleaned and oiled. On the bench, pieces of broken equipment laid out like surgery patients' hinges, brackets, a twisted horseshoe, the crack-toothed gear from Morrison's seed drill. "Where did these come from?" "Your scrap pile, behind the shed." She pulled the metal from the fire again. Most of it salvageable. The plow piece was straight now. She set it aside, picked up a gate hinge split down the middle. Into the fire it went. While it heated, she pumped the bellows, the leather she'd somehow patched with what looked like pieces cut from her trunk's lining. "That's the Henderson's hinge. Was. Will be again." She checked the color. Not ready. More pumping. Her right arm showed muscle when she worked the bellows, the kind that came from years of repetition. "How long have you been up?" 3 hours, maybe 4. The metal ready now. Out it came. "Needed to test the coal quality. You've got good coal, half slag in the bottom, but the new stuff burns clean." The hammer sang against the hinge. Somehow she was welding the split closed, adding a thin rod of metal she heated separately, binding the break like stitching a wound. Sparks flew. One landed on her forearm. She brushed it off without pausing. Another small scar to add to the collection. Henderson's wagon pulled up while she was finishing the third piece. Ben heard it recognize the squeaky wheel Henderson kept meaning to fix. Through the shed opening, Henderson himself climbed down, that careful way he had of moving since his back went bad last harvest. "Ben." Henderson stopped at the shed entrance, stared. Margaret had her back to him, muscles in her shoulders visible through the sweat-soaked dress as she worked the bellows. "That your—" "My wife, Margaret." The word felt strange, wire in his mouth. Margaret turned, nodded once. Her face gleamed with sweat and soot, except for clean lines where she'd wiped her forehead with her sleeve. "Mr. Henderson, Ben mentioned your plow trouble." Henderson's eyes went to the repaired piece cooling on the bench. "That's my—" He picked it up, turned it in the light, ran his thumb along where the break had been. "Better than new. The metal's good quality. Just needed proper heat treatment." She'd already turned back to the forge. "Your gate hinge will be ready in 10 minutes. How much?" Margaret glanced at Ben. He had no idea what to charge. His father had bartered mostly work for eggs, repairs for flour. 50 cents for both, she said. "Cash?" Henderson whistled low. "That's town prices. Town's 20 miles. Your plow's needed now, with planting season coming." And she pulled the hinge from the fire. 3 more strikes and it was done. Into the water bucket for quenching, steam rising like morning mist. "But if that's too much, we'll take trade." "What are you offering?" "Got a $25. Could throw in a sack of cornmeal?" "The money in 2 sacks. Your corn's good, I saw your fields on the ride from town." Henderson actually smiled. First time since his wife passed. "Deal." He counted the coins into her palm. Silver on skin stained black from the work. "Word gets out you're doing repairs. You'll have a line to the road. Send them." She was already picking up the next broken piece. "But cash only for the first 10 customers. Need operating capital." Henderson loaded his repaired parts carefully, like they might break again if he breathed wrong. After his wagon creaked away, Margaret held the coins to the light. Real silver. Not scrip, not promise notes. Money. 50 cents, Ben said. "That's what town charges. Town charges 75, but town makes you wait 3 days." She'd found another project in the scrap looked like part of a harness buckle. People pay for speed. By noon, 3 more wagons had come. Word traveled fast in a county where everyone watched everyone else's business. Morrison wanting his seed drill gear repaired. The younger boy with his father's broken rifle trigger guard. Mrs. Patterson 90 if she was a day with a soup pot that had lost its handle. Margaret took them all. Quoted prices, negotiated when they countered, but never below her bottom number. The cigar box she'd produced from her trunk began to fill. Quarters and dimes mostly, but some $50 too. Ben worked beside her when she let him, pumping bellows, fetching tools, learning the color changes that meant ready or wait. His father had never taught him these subtleties. Too proud. Maybe. Or thinking there'd be more time. "The rifle part," Ben said while she worked on it. "We shouldn't be fixing weapons." Her hammer never paused. "It's a trigger guard. Keeps the finger safe. That's all." The younger boy paid with a whole $1. Paper money crumpled from his pocket. "Pa says thank you. Says he knew your daddy. Back in Missouri." Margaret's shoulders tightened. First time Ben had seen her react to anything beyond business. Did he? Says you did good work there, too. Before. The boy stopped, reddened. Anyway, thank you, ma'am. After he left, Margaret stood quiet at the forge. The coals needed feeding, but she didn't move. Ben added coal himself, working around her stillness. My father died owing money. Her voice came out flat. Shop seized. Tools sold. Everything except what I could hide in that trunk. She picked up the hammer again. Your advertisement seemed like an answer. To what question? Whether I could start over. Whether anyone would let me work instead of just... She gestured at the house. Cooking. Cleaning. Being decorative. You cook fine. That got an almost smile. I cook practically. Same as I do everything. Mrs. Patterson returned for her pot before sundown, pulling up in her ancient buggy that was older than Ben himself. Margaret had not just reattached the handle but reinforced it with a metal sleeve that would outlast the pot itself. How much, dear? 20 cents. Mrs. Patterson counted out dimes with shaking fingers, then added another. For your trousseau fund. Margaret's jaw worked. We're already married, Mrs. Patterson. Everybody needs something set aside. Trust me on that. The old woman's eyes were sharp as tacks despite her age. Ben's father understood that, had his own funds tucked away, didn't he? Ben's stomach dropped. The account book. The real one. Still sitting on the workbench where he'd spotted it yesterday, now covered with a cloth. But underneath all those debts his father had hidden. 3 times what Ben had thought. Margaret was watching him, reading his face like she read hot metal. How much, not talking to Mrs. Patterson anymore, how much did his father owe? Mrs. Patterson's buggy wheels ground against gravel, fading down the drive. Margaret stood waiting, hammer loose in her hand. The question hung between them like heat shimmer from the forge. Ben's mouth went dry. The account book lay under that cloth. Every damning entry in his father's careful script. Interest compounding. Notes called in. Promises broken. $243. The number scraped out of his throat. Plus interest accumulating. Call it $275 by now. Margaret set the hammer on the anvil, pulled off the leather apron, hung it on its hook. The movements deliberate, each one buying time while she calculated. The $75 Monday. That's just one payment. First of 4. Bank wouldn't extend the full amount at once. So $350 total, plus the operating debt. She moved to the workbench, lifted the cloth from his father's book, opened it. Her finger tracked down columns while twilight faded through the broken roof slats. Seed company, hardware store, doctor bills from his final illness. Yes. Why didn't you mention this yesterday? Would you have stayed? She looked up from the ledger. Soot streaked her left cheek where she'd wiped sweat. Her eyes held the same color as cooling metal gray with hints of fire underneath. I need to see the windmill. Not an answer. Or maybe it was. Ben led her behind the barn where the windmill stood, blades hanging useless. The main gear had stripped teeth like an old man's smile. The pump rod hung disconnected. Well water 30 feet down and might as well be in China. Margaret circled the structure, touched the support posts, checking for rot, climbed the ladder without hesitation. Her boots sure on rungs that gave under Ben's weight when he followed. At the platform, she examined the gear housing, running her fingers along the worn teeth. This breaks. The cattle have no water. Been hauling buckets from the creek 3 times a day. Your back must hurt. It did. Sharp pains that started at dawn, lasted through dark. But admitting that seemed weak, so he said nothing. We can fix this. She was already climbing down. Not replace, fix. Need to pull the whole assembly. Recut the worn gears. Fabricate new teeth for the stripped sections. That's 2 days' work at least. 1 day, if you help. At the bottom, she turned to face him. Can you help, or do you have something more important? He thought of the fence posts needing replacement, the hay that wanted cutting, the dozen other tasks that kept a ranch running. All of them urgent, none of them as urgent as water. I can help. They worked through supper time without stopping. Margaret had him hold parts while she unbolted the gear assembly, her fingers quick with the wrenches. The main gear weighed enough that lifting it required both of them. Faces close enough he could smell the coal dust in her hair. Your father, Ben said while they strained together. You said he died when you were 12. Pneumonia, working in winter, wet clothes, wouldn't stop for fever. They set the gear on the workbench. Lasted 8 days. Your mother, birth fever, having me. She selected a file, began working on the gear teeth. Father raised me in the shop. Had no choice, couldn't afford help, and couldn't leave me alone. The file made a sound like grinding bones. Metal dust fell silver in the lamplight. Taught me reading from invoice books, writing from order forms, mathematics from calculating prices. Her hands never stopped moving. When other girls were learning embroidery, I was learning how hot to make different metals. The scars on your arms. Every one a lesson. Iron sparks different from steel. Copper burns white. Brass leaves marks that fade. Iron stays forever. She switched to a finer file. Like mistakes, Ben took the worn gear teeth she'd removed, studying the wear patterns. You kept the shop running 4 years alone. 3.5. Last 6 months. The creditors circled like buzzards. Watching. Waiting. A 16-year-old girl with no male relatives. Easy prey. The filing stopped. She selected another tool, a small chisel. They were right. What happened? Sheriff's sale. Everything. Even Father's personal tools, which weren't supposed to be included. She positioned the chisel, struck with a small hammer. A worn tooth fell away clean. I hid what I could in the trunk, claimed it was my hope chest. They laughed, but let me keep it. Then you answered my advertisement. Answered 12 advertisements. Yours was the only one that mentioned a forge. Another strike, another tooth removed. Thought maybe I could do something useful, instead of just existing. They worked until the lamp oil ran low. Ben fetched another lamp from the house, then another when that one dimmed. His back screamed from bending over the bench, but Margaret showed no sign of stopping. Tell me about the debts, she said during the third lamp. Not the numbers, the why. Ben's hands tightened on the gear section he was cleaning. Drought 3 years back. Lost half the herd. Father borrowed to buy replacement cattle, but they got fever. Died before we could sell them. That's maybe $50 of debt. Then Mother got sick. Doctor from Denver. Medicines from San Francisco. Special foods she could keep down. His throat closed. Father would have sold his soul to save her. Did it work? She lasted 6 months longer than predicted. Good months, mostly. She could sit up, talk, even walked in the garden once. The memory cut sharp. Father said it was worth any price. Was it? Yes. Margaret nodded. Kept filing. After a while, my father would have done the same. Did do the same. Actually. Bought medicine he couldn't afford. Didn't help. But he tried. The trying matters. Does it? We're both still paying for their trying. No answer for that. They worked in silence until a new problem emerged. The fabricated teeth Margaret had shaped wouldn't fit properly. The angle was wrong by a fraction, but that fraction meant the difference between functioning and failing. Hold this. She positioned his hands on the gear. Don't move. She heated a small section with a torch made from pipe and coal oil. The flame blew and focused. The metal began to glow, just barely. She struck it with precise hits. each one shifting the angle minutely. Ben's hands went numb from holding position, but he didn't move. There. She quenched the section in oil, smoke rising harsh. Try now. The teeth meshed perfect. Ben turned the gear experimentally. Smooth as butter, no. That was the kind of comparison she'd hate. Smooth as well-oiled machinery. Precise. Functional. Tomorrow we mount it, she said, finally showing exhaustion in the way she leaned against the bench. Should have water by noon. Margaret. He needed to say something about the work, about her saving them days of labor, about the skill he'd just witnessed. But words tangled in his throat. She was cleaning tools, movements automatic despite fatigue. We need to talk about the business. Business. The repair business. If we're going to generate enough income to cover the debts, it can't be random neighbors showing up. Needs structure, advertising, pricing strategy. You've thought about this. All evening, while working. She dried the tools with an oiled cloth. Your father had connections. People who trusted Caldwell work. We leverage that reputation. Add my skills. Create something sustainable. She turned to face him full on. In the lamplight. Her face showed exhaustion, but also something else. Determination hard as the metal she shaped. I didn't come here for romance, Mr. Caldwell. Neither did you. Regardless what your advertisement said. You need help. I need a place to work. That's a transaction. She pulled the apron off, hung it carefully. But if we're going to survive both of us, it has to be more than that. Has to be partnership. Equal partnership. Equal work. Equal say in decisions. Your name on the papers. Legally. But my hands on the forge. She paused. Can you accept that? Ben thought of his father. Proud and stubborn. Working alone until work killed him. Thought of the mortality notice. 3 days away. Thought of this woman who'd outworked him all day without complaint. Yes. She extended her hand, not like a lady expecting gentle treatment, but like a man sealing a deal. Ben shook it, feeling calluses that matched his own. Good. She gathered the lamps. Coffee at 4. We start early if we're going to get that windmill running before the heat. She walked toward the house, leaving him in darkness. But something glinted on the workbench. She'd forgotten something. Ben picked it up. A small daguerreotype in a brass frame, fallen from her apron pocket. The image showed a young girl beside a massive man at a forge, both serious-faced, formal. But the man's hand rested on the girl's shoulder with obvious pride. And the girl, maybe 8 years old, held a perfectly formed horseshoe like it was made of gold. On the back. Careful script. Margaret and James Foster. First solo forging. 1867. Ben calculated quickly. She'd been working metal for 12 years. Since before his voice changed. And if she'd been running the shop alone since 16, the mortgage notice sat in his pocket. Monday circled in red ink. 3 days to raise $50 more. Margaret thought they could do it with repairs. But word would have to spread fast, and people would have to trust a woman with their equipment, in a town where wives didn't even handle household money without permission. Unless they didn't know it was a woman doing the work. The church pew wood pressed hard against Ben's spine. Beside him, Margaret sat straight, her brown work dress dark against the white cotton and silk surrounding them. No gloves. Her hands rested on the hymnal, forge calluses visible to anyone who cared to look. Mrs. Henderson, 2 rows ahead, cared to look. She whispered something to Mrs. Morrison. Mrs. Morrison turned, stared, whispered to Mrs. Younger. Reverend Davis called for hymn 43. Pages rustled. Margaret opened to the correct page without checking the number. She'd memorized them. Apparently. Her voice came out steady, lower than the sopranos around them. Working voice. Not Sunday voice. Bringing in the sheaves, the congregation sang. But Ben heard the breaks where women stopped to whisper. The woman, working iron, like a man. Sweat collected under Ben's collar despite the morning cool. He wanted to tell Margaret to lower her hands, hide the calluses, but she held the book steady, unashamed. A burn mark on her left thumb caught light from the window. Fresh from yesterday's forge work, Reverend Davis began his sermon. Something about proper helpmates, Eve from Adam's rib, women as the softer vessel. Ben's jaw clenched tighter with each verse quoted. Margaret's expression never changed, but her knuckles whitened where she gripped the hymnal. A virtuous woman, Davis intoned, who can find for her worth is far above rubies. Mrs. Patterson, in the front row despite barely hearing anymore, turned around completely, looked straight at Margaret, nodded once, sharp, like she was agreeing with something nobody had said. After service, Ben tried to steer Margaret toward the wagon, but Mrs. Henderson intercepted them at the door. "Margaret, dear." And the dear came out sharp as filed metal. "We need to discuss your integration into our community." "Integration?" Margaret's voice stayed flat. "The Ladies' Aid Society meets Tuesdays. We piece quilts for the needy." Mrs. Henderson's eyes traveled down Margaret's dress, stopping at the hem where forged spark holes made a pattern. "Perhaps you could contribute some feminine pursuits." "I contribute through work." "Yes, we've heard." Mrs. Morrison had joined them, bringing Mrs. Younger and 3 other women Ben didn't recognize. Town women, from their unblemished hands. Working in that shed, with fire and metal. "The forge," Margaret corrected. "And yes, it's unseemly." Mrs. Younger clutched her Bible like Margaret might grab it. "A woman's place is where she's needed." Margaret's interruption came quiet but firm. "My husband needs the forge operational. I operate it." "Shh." "Your husband." Mrs. Henderson's emphasis on the word made Ben's stomach turn. "Perhaps he should consider what's proper. What people will say." Ben opened his mouth, but Margaret touched his arm. The smallest pressure, but he felt it like a brand. "What will they say?" "Mrs. Henderson. That you're—" Mrs. Henderson struggled for appropriate church door words. "Masculine. Unnatural." "Will they say it when their plows are fixed? When their equipment works in time for harvest?" Margaret's tone never changed from polite inquiry. "Or only on Sundays, when work doesn't matter?" Reverend Davis appeared, drawn by the cluster of women. "Ladies. Ben. Is there a problem?" "We're concerned," Mrs. Henderson said quickly. "About propriety?" "Propriety." Davis looked between them. "Margaret works the forge," Mrs. Morrison supplied. "Like a man?" Davis's eyebrows rose. He studied Margaret, the calloused hands, the spark burns, the straight spine that wouldn't bend to their pressure. "I see, and this concerns you because—" "It's not proper," Mrs. Younger insisted. "Neither is starving." Margaret's words dropped like hammer strikes. "Which is what happens when farms fail, when equipment breaks and can't be fixed, when—" "We should go." Ben finally found his voice. "Work to do." "On the Sabbath?" Davis asked. "Cattle need water every day," Ben replied. "Even Sundays." He guided Margaret toward the wagon. Behind them, whispers rose like smoke. At the wagon, Margaret climbed up without assistance, her movements sharp with suppressed anger. They rode in silence until the church disappeared behind the rise. Then Margaret spoke, still staring straight ahead. "They'd rather see us fail than see me work. Not all of them. Mrs. Patterson is 90 years old and past caring what anyone thinks." Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. "The others want me in the kitchen, silent, decorative. You're none of those things." "No." Her agreement came out bitter. "I'm useful, and that's worse. Somehow." At the ranch, a buggy already waited. Mrs. Henderson had somehow beaten them there. Probably took the creek road. She stood beside it, holding a basket covered with checkered cloth. "I brought bread," she announced, as if that explained everything. "Fresh baked." She followed them inside without invitation, set the basket on the table, removed the cloth with ceremony. The bread smelled of yeast and comfort. Everything Margaret's kitchen didn't produce. How nice. Margaret's voice could have etched glass. "We have flour." "Bread requires more than flour, dear. It requires patience, gentleness, a woman's touch." Mrs. Henderson surveyed the spare kitchen, no curtains, no tablecloth, nothing soft. "Perhaps I could teach you, help you become the wife Ben deserves." Ben saw Margaret's shoulders tighten, the same tension before she struck hot metal. "The wife I deserve." Ben heard his own voice, dangerous quiet. "A proper wife, one who knows her place." Mrs. Henderson touched the table where forge dust had settled. "Not this arrangement." "Get out." Ben didn't remember deciding to speak. The words just came. "Now." Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Benjamin Caldwell, I'm only trying to help. You're trying to change something that doesn't need changing." He moved to the door, held it open. "Margaret is my wife. She works beside me. That's all anyone needs to know. People will talk. Let them." Mrs. Henderson gathered her dignity like skirts, swept toward the door, stopped beside him. "Your father would be appalled. My father is dead. His debts aren't—" Ben met her eyes steady. "Margaret's work might save this ranch. Your bread won't." After the buggy dust settled, Ben found Margaret at the forge. Not working, just standing there, staring at the cold coals. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He picked up the bellows, began pumping air through the coals. "They have no right. They have every right. It's their community, their rules." She selected a piece of iron from the scrap pile. "I knew what I was walking into. A woman working forge. It's not natural to them." "Is it natural to you?" She looked at him then, really looked. In the afternoon light through the broken roof, her eyes held depths he hadn't noticed before. Like looking into good steel, layers and layers, each one adding strength. "Nothing about my life has been natural. Mother dead at birth, raised in a forge, running a business at 12, answering a stranger's advertisement for marriage." She hefted the iron, testing weight. "Natural is for other people. Would you change it if you could?" The question hung between them. Margaret set the iron on the anvil, picked up the hammer, set it down again. "Sunday afternoon, we're losing work time." She turned to the bellows. "Tomorrow Morrison wants his cultivator fixed. The Jameson brothers need horseshoes. And Margaret." She stopped, waited. "Would you change it?" A long pause. Then, "Ask me again when we've made the mortgage payment." They worked in companionable silence, heating iron that didn't really need heating, shaping metal that didn't need shaping. Practice, maybe. Or just the comfort of doing something they understood while the world outside made less and less sense. Near sunset, hoofbeats approached, fast, too fast for casual visiting. Ben stepped outside to see Tom Morrison riding hard, his horse lathered with sweat. "Ben!" Morrison pulled up sharp, dust swirling. "You need to know bank examiner's coming early." Ben's chest went tight. "How early?" "Tomorrow, noon." Morrison's eyes went to Margaret, who'd emerged from the forge. "Heard him at the saloon. Says he's clearing all the overdue notes. Every farm that can't pay gets foreclosed. No extensions. Tomorrow, not Monday." They'd lost 2 days. Ben calculated quick. $26 saved. Maybe 10 more from promised repairs. Still 40 short. "There's more." Morrison said. He's bringing the sheriff and a buyer. Man from Denver wants to consolidate failed ranches into one big operation. Margaret stepped forward. Who's the buyer? Morrison's face went grim. Same man who bought out the Turner place. And the Youngers' North pasture. And Margaret. He looked at her direct. He specifically asked about ranches with working forges. Morrison's dust hadn't settled when the crack came from the barn. Sharp, like a rifle shot, but wrong metallic. Final. Margaret was running before Ben understood what he'd heard. The thresher sat where they'd left it after last harvest. The main gear hung at an angle that shouldn't exist. The crack they'd worried about had split complete through. 200 pounds of cast iron. Broken like a promise. Margaret's hands moved across the brake, reading the metal's failure. Oil seeped from the housing. Black as the death sentence this was. Harvest starts Thursday. Ben's voice came out hollow. 3 days. Without this. No harvest. No harvest. No payment for stored grain. Margaret wiped oil from her fingers onto her apron. How much would grain bring? $60, maybe $70 if prices hold. Enough. More than enough. If they could harvest. Margaret circled the thresher, dropped to her knees, examined the undercarriage, stood, walked to the forge shed, Ben following. She pulled down every piece of scrap metal, laying them on the ground like puzzle pieces. No. Ben saw what she was thinking. You can't forge a gear that size. Not forge. Fabricate. She picked up a piece of heavy strap iron. Another, holding them against each other, measuring with her eyes. Your father have any steel plate? Behind the chicken coop, but it's rusted through. Show me. The plates leaned against the coop's north wall. 3 sheets, each 4 feet square. Rust had eaten holes through 2 of them. The third was better surface rust only, metal intact underneath. Margaret struck it with her knuckles. The ring came back clear, not the dull thud of corrupted metal. This might work. She was already calculating. That distant look that meant her mind was solving problems her hands would follow. Need to cut it, shape it, build a sleeve to hold the broken gear together long enough to harvest. That's... Ben stopped. Impossible. Everything she did seemed impossible until she did it. Get the wagon. We're moving everything to the forge. They worked through sunset, through full dark. The broken gear took both of them to move, Ben's back screaming protest. Margaret had him position lanterns around the forge, 5 of them creating overlapping circles of light. She heated the steel plate section by section, not enough to make it glow, just enough to make it workable. Her hammer rang steady as heartbeat, bending the metal into a curve that matched the gear's circumference. Hold this. She positioned his hands on the hot metal. Even through the thick gloves she'd given him, heat bit deep. Don't let it shift. She worked around his grip, adding pieces, building a framework that would cradle the broken gear. Sweat ran into Ben's eyes. His shoulders burned from holding position. The metal cooled. She heated it again, over and over. Why didn't you go back? Ben asked during one heating. After your father died, you had skills. Could have worked for another blacksmith. As what no smith would take a female apprentice. She positioned another piece. And I couldn't pretend to be a boy forever. Body had other ideas. You tried. 6 months, bound my chest, cut my hair, lowered my voice. The hammer fell precise. Worked until monthlies came in the middle of shoeing a horse. Blood showed through the trousers. Game over. She'd never spoken this plain about female things. Ben's ears went hot, but he kept his grip steady. What happened? Smith threw me out. Kept my tools as payment for deception. Another strike. Month later, the bank took the rest. Midnight passed. 1 lantern died. Ben refilled it, working around Margaret's movements. She'd entered some state beyond exhaustion, movements automatic, eyes focused on something past the metal. You need rest. Need this more. She selected another piece of scrap. Without the thresher, nothing else matters. Margaret. Talk or work? Not both. They worked. Ben pumped bellows when she needed heat, held pieces when she needed hands, fetched water when her voice went raw from heat and smoke. His own throat felt like sand, but complaining seemed weak against her relentless pace. 3 in the morning, maybe 4. Time stopped meaning anything except the rhythm of hammer on steel. Margaret's movements had slowed but not stopped. She stood at the anvil, swaying slightly, still striking. Her eyes were closed. Ben touched her shoulder. She jerked awake, hammer raised like a weapon. "Coffee," he said. "I'll make coffee." She nodded, set the hammer down, leaned against the workbench. When Ben returned with 2 cups, she was asleep, standing up, one hand still gripping the tongs. He set the coffee down quiet, studied what she'd built. It looked like a metal spider, all legs and joints, designed to wrap around the broken gear and hold it together through pressure and precision. Ugly as sin. But the engineering every stress point reinforced, every angle calculated to distribute force. Margaret stirred, took the coffee without words, drained it black and bitter. "Almost done. 2 more pieces." "You can't see straight." "Don't need to." "Hands, no." She proved it, working more by touch than sight. She fitted the final pieces. The whole assembly came together like she'd planned it from the start, which she probably had, in that space behind her eyes where metal became possibility. "Help me carry it." They loaded the sleeve onto the wagon, drove to the barn in pre-dawn darkness. The broken gear sat waiting like a patient. Margaret fitted the sleeve around it, adjusting bolts, tightening connections. The sun broke the horizon as she torqued the last bolt. Started up. Ben cranked the thresher engine. It caught, coughed, caught again. The gears began to turn, slow, grinding, then smoothing as the sleeve found its rhythm. The broken gear held, trapped in Margaret's metal web. She watched it turn, counting rotations, 10, 20, 50. "It works." Ben couldn't keep the amazement out. "For now, maybe 20 hours of operation before the stress breaks it." She sat down hard on a hay bale, just sat, looking at nothing. 20 hours might be enough. "Margaret." He sat beside her, close enough their shoulders touched. "What you just did." "What I did was buy time." She turned to look at him. Really look. In the morning light, her face showed every hour of lost sleep. "But time for what? We're still $40 short. Examiner comes at noon. 6 hours. The repairs to $10 worth, maybe 15. People won't have cash on hand. They never do." She was right. Ben knew she was right. But something in him refused to accept it. Not after watching her work through the night. Not after seeing what impossible looked like when it became possible. There has to be something. "There is." Margaret stood, walked to the barn door. "Stared out at the ranch, their ranch, for 6 more hours. The buyer wants the forge. Probably knows about my work. Skills like mine. He could charge double what we do." "He can't have you." "Not me. The forge. The tools." She turned back to him. "But he'd probably hire me to run it. Same work. Different owner." The words hit Ben like cold water. She was thinking past failure. Past them. Already planning survival without him. "You'd work for him. Would you rather I starve?" "I'd rather. What they fight. They'd been fighting all night. They run. Nowhere to run. They somehow produce $40 from thin air." "Wait." Ben stood so fast his vision sparked. "Your trunk. What about it? You said you hid tools. Your father's tools?" He was already moving toward the house. "Good tools. German steel. You said? Margaret followed. Those aren't for sale. Everything's for sale when the alternative is nothing. No. Margaret, I said no. Her voice went flat, final. Those are all I have left of him. And this ranch is all I have left of my father. But if selling saves us, it won't. Tools might bring $20. Still 20 short. 20 short. Always 20 short. Like the universe had calculated exactly how much hope to leave them just enough to hurt. The sound of horses came from the road. Multiple horses. Too early for the examiner. But maybe Ben stepped onto the porch. 3 wagons approaching. Henderson driving the first. Morrison the second. The Jameson brothers in the third. Each wagon loaded with something. Morning, Ben. Henderson pulled up. Set the brake. Heard you fixed the thresher. Margaret fixed it. Worked all night. That's so. Henderson climbed down. Reached into his wagon bed. Pulled out a plow blade, twisted beyond use. Shame to interrupt, but I need this straightened. Today. Mr. Henderson, we don't have time. Pay cash. Henderson pulled bills from his pocket. $5. $5 for a 20-minute job. Ben opened his mouth to protest, but Morrison was already unloading his wagon. 3 broken cultivator shanks. $10 for the lot. Cash up front. The Jameson brothers had a whole collection harrow teeth, a bent axle, various brackets and braces. $15. But only if you can do it this morning. Ben looked at Margaret. She stood frozen on the porch, understanding what he was only beginning to grasp. This wasn't coincidence. This was community. The kind that didn't announce itself, just showed up. Gentlemen, another voice from the road. Ben turned to see a figure on horseback, riding hard from town. As the rider got closer, Ben recognized the clothes' black suit, string tie, leather portfolio, the bank examiner. 4 hours early. The examiner's horse pulled up hard, foam at its mouth. The man dismounted with the careful precision of someone who'd ridden through the night. Dust covered his black suit. His portfolio bore mud splatter from creek crossings. Mr. Caldwell. His voice came out hoarse. Mr. Edward Morse, First National Bank of Denver. Not the local banker. Denver. Ben's throat closed. You're early, Henderson said from beside his wagon. Notice said noon. Plans changed. Morse pulled papers from his portfolio. Mr. Caldwell, I need to inspect your accounts immediately. Our accounts are in order. Margaret stepped forward. Her exhaustion from the night's work had vanished, replaced by something harder. Would you care for coffee while I gather the ledgers? This isn't a social call. Mrs. Caldwell. Margaret Caldwell. She extended her hand like a man would. Morse looked at it like she'd offered him a snake. I maintain the books. Women don't... Morse stopped, recalculated. The books. Yes. Fetch them. Margaret walked to the house, back straight despite the night without sleep. Ben saw her fingers trembling only because he knew to look. Morrison climbed down from his wagon. While you're waiting, Mr. Morse, might as well unload these repairs. Ben, where do you want the cultivator shanks? I don't have time. Just take a minute. Morrison hefted a piece of twisted metal. Come on, Jameson boys, let's get this sorted. They made a production of it, unloading, discussing each piece, counting out payment loud enough for Morse to hear, cash money changing hands. Henderson added his $5 with ceremony, making sure the bills were visible. $30, he announced, for priority repairs. Morse's eyes tracked the money. You run a repair business. My wife does. Ben pocketed the bills. Best forge work in the county. Women don't do forge work. This one does. Old Mrs. Patterson's buggy creaked up the drive. How she'd heard. Ben couldn't guess. But there she was, 90 years old and steady as iron. Mr. Morse, I assume I'm Mrs. Elizabeth Patterson. My late husband founded this county's first bank, before Denver even existed. Morse straightened. The Patterson name still carried weight, even in Denver. Ma'am. Don't ma'am me. Young man, I'm here on business. She climbed down without help, carrying a cloth bundle. Margaret Caldwell repaired my soup pot yesterday. Finest work I've seen in 40 years. I'm here to commission additional work. She unwrapped the bundle. 3 antique trivets, cast iron, all with broken legs. These were my grandmother's, brought from Pennsylvania in 1842. $10 each if she can repair them today. Another 30. Ben's chest loosened slightly. 60 total now. Almost enough. Margaret emerged with the ledgers. 2 books, the general accounts and her new one, started 3 days ago. She set them on the porch table, opened both. First, National Bank of Denver holds a note for $75, due today. Her finger tracked down the page. We're prepared to pay. The full amount? Yes. Morse examined the books. His finger stopped at several entries. These repairs, all completed in 3 days. Yes. By a woman. By me. Yes. He looked up sharp. I'll need proof. Margaret stood, walked to the forge without a word. Ben heard the bellows working, the coal catching. Within minutes, smoke rose black against morning sky. Henderson, she called. Bring your plow blade. Henderson carried the twisted metal to the forge. Margaret had the coal white hot already. She took the blade with tongs, positioned it in the fire, waited, watching the color change with that focus Ben had seen all night. The metal came out orange bright. She positioned it on the anvil. The hammer rose and fell in perfect rhythm. Each strike straightened the twist slightly. Back into the fire. Out again. More strikes. The blade began to resume its proper shape. Morse had walked closer, drawn despite himself. The Jameson brothers and Morrison followed. Even Mrs. Patterson moved to watch. Margaret worked like they weren't there, like the world contained nothing but her. The hammer, and the metal that needed shaping. Sweat appeared on her forehead, but her strikes never wavered. The blade straightened more, perfect. Into the water bucket for quenching. Steam rose sharp and white. She pulled it out, tested the edge with her thumb, then handed it to Henderson. Fixed. Henderson ran his hands along the blade. Better than new. Look at that edge. 5 minutes, Morrison said. Took her 5 minutes. A man couldn't do it faster, one of the Jameson brothers added. Morse stood silent, calculating. Margaret had returned to the anvil, already working on Morrison's cultivator shank. Her movements were economical, no wasted motion, professional. The buyer from Denver, Morse said finally. He mentioned this ranch specifically, said there was skilled forge work here. There is, Ben replied. He's offering to buy out the note, take over the ranch, keep the forge operational. With Margaret running it, Morse laughed, short and sharp. Of course not. He'd bring in a proper smith from Denver. Then he's a fool. Mrs. Patterson's voice cut like winter wind. No Denver smith could do what we just witnessed. Nevertheless, Morse returned to the ledgers. The payment. You said you have it. Margaret set down her hammer, walked to the porch. From her apron pocket, she pulled bills, counted them onto the table. 30 from this morning's repairs, 26 from previous work. $56, 19 short. That's insufficient, Morse said. We're not finished counting. Margaret went into the house, returned with a small cloth bag, poured its contents onto the table. Silver dollars, 10 of them, tarnished with age but solid. My savings, she said simply. 66, still 9 short. Ben's chest tightened. So close. After everything, still short by the price of a good meal in Denver. I have $5. Mrs. Patterson said. For the first trivet repair, 71. 4 short. Got $3 here, Henderson said, pulling bills from his back pocket. Advance for next month's work. 74. $1 short. $1. Ben wanted to laugh, or scream, or both. Morse gathered the money, counting it himself. $74. The note is for 75. $1. Morrison said. You'd foreclose over $1. The law is precise. Full payment or foreclosure. Then we're done here. Morse began preparing foreclosure documents. Mr. Caldwell, you have 1 hour to vacate. Wait. Margaret walked to her trunk, still sitting beside the forge from the night's work. She opened it. From the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth. She pulled something Ben hadn't seen before, a hammer. But not just any hammer, the head was engraved with delicate scrollwork, the handle dark wood worn smooth by generations of hands. This was my great-grandfather's, made in Frankfurt, 1794. She held it to the light. German steel, perfect balance, never been reforged. Morse barely glanced at it. I don't take tools as payment. I'm not offering it to you. Margaret turned to Mrs. Patterson. Would you consider this worth $1? Mrs. Patterson took the hammer, tested its weight. Her fingers traced the engraving. I'd consider it worth considerably more. $1, Margaret repeated. For the hammer. Sold. Mrs. Patterson pulled a silver dollar from her purse, pressed it into Margaret's hand, then tried to return the hammer. Keep it, Margaret said. A deal's a deal. I can't. You can. You will. Margaret's voice broke slightly. First time Ben had heard it crack. Please. Mrs. Patterson nodded, held the hammer against her chest like a baby. Margaret turned to Morse. Place the final dollar on the table. $75, paid in full. Morse counted again, slower this time, looking for any excuse, finding none. I'll need a receipt, Ben said. Morse wrote it out, each letter carved deep with irritation. He signed, sealed it with wax from his portable kit, handed it over like it physically hurt. The next payment is due in 30 days. Same amount. We'll be ready, Margaret said. We'll see. Morse gathered his papers, mounted his horse. The buyer from Denver will be disappointed. He particularly wanted this property. Then he should have come himself, Ben replied. Morse rode off, dust rising behind him like spite. The group stood silent. Then Henderson started laughing. Morrison joined. Even the Jameson brothers smiled, which for them was equivalent to hysteria. $1, Morrison kept saying. Came down to $1. Margaret. Mrs. Patterson approached with the hammer. This belongs with you. A deal can be amended. The old woman pressed the hammer into Margaret's hands. Consider it a loan, until you can buy it back. Margaret's fingers closed around the handle. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank your husband. Mrs. Patterson looked at Ben. He defended you yesterday. At church. Told Mrs. Henderson to leave. Word spread. Ben looked at the assembled neighbors. Is that why you're all here? We're here because the work needs doing, Henderson said. But also because... He stopped. Started again. Your father helped me when my barn burned. Wouldn't take payment. Said neighbors help neighbors. My father died in debt. He died with friends. Mrs. Patterson corrected. That's worth more than money. The neighbors loaded their repaired equipment, made excuses about other appointments, departed one by one, leaving Ben and Margaret alone on the porch. Margaret sat down hard on the steps. The hammer rested across her lap. We did it, Ben said. For now, 30 days until the next payment. We'll manage. Will we? She looked up at him. This buyer from Denver? He won't stop. Men like that never do. Ben thought about Morse's comment. The buyer particularly wanted this property. Not just any ranch, this one. With its forge. With Margaret's skills already proven. Margaret, what if the buyer already knew about you before we got married? She went still. What do you mean? You answered 12 advertisements. You said, what if someone else saw them, tracked where you went? That's... She stopped. Her face went pale under the forge dust. My God. What? She stood, hammer gripping tight. In St. Louis, before I left. A man came asking about female blacksmiths, said he was writing a newspaper story. I didn't tell him anything, but Mrs. Clearwater at the boarding house, she knew where I was going. Morning came quiet, no hammering from the forge, no wagons in the yard, just the coffee pot ticking on the stove and Margaret sitting at the table, her father's hammer beside her plate. Ben poured 2 cups, set one before her. The steam rose between them, carrying the smell of chicory she'd added to stretch the beans. We need to talk about the buyer, she said. We need to talk about us. Margaret's hand stilled on the cup handle. Us. Ben sat across from her, the chair his mother used to occupy. He'd avoided it for 2 years, but this morning it felt right. This arrangement, what we're doing here. We're surviving. No, we survived. Past tense. Yesterday we survived. He gestured toward the window where the forge shed stood. Now we need to decide what comes next. Margaret lifted her coffee, set it down without drinking. The next payment is due in 30 days. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean. They sat in the quiet. Outside. A meadowlark called. The sound carried through the kitchen window Margaret had fixed yesterday, no, 2 days ago. Time blurred when you didn't sleep. Your advertisement, Margaret said finally. You wanted a wife, a real wife, someone to fill this kitchen with bread smell and curtains. I thought I did. And now, Ben looked at her, really looked. Forge dust still darkened the creases around her eyes. A burn on her left wrist, fresh from last night. Her hair, pulled back with a piece of wire because she'd lost her pins somewhere between fixing the thresher and facing down Morse. Now I want a partner. You have one. Do I? Margaret's jaw worked. She stood, walked to the window. Her reflection showed nothing, but Ben saw her shoulders pull tight. In St. Louis, she said. When that man came asking about female blacksmiths, I knew something was wrong. The questions were too specific. Did I know anyone who could work German steel, could shape Swedish iron, could repair precision gears? She turned from the window. He was hunting, not for a story. For me. You think he's the buyer from Denver. I think someone wants what I can do, has wanted it long enough to track me here. Her fingers found the hammer on the table. My father taught me things. Techniques from the old country. Methods that died when craftsmen started favoring speed over quality. Valuable techniques. To the right buyer. Very valuable. She met his eyes. If this man is who I think, he won't stop. He'll wait 30 days. Watch us scramble. Then offer just enough to seem like salvation. We won't take it. Won't we, when the choice is his money or losing everything? Ben stood, crossed to her, close enough to see the exhaustion she was fighting. There's another choice. What? We make this legal, real legal. Not just a paper marriage, but... He stopped. Started over. If you're my wife, real wife. He can't hire you away. Can't separate the forge from the ranch. Can't... Ben. Let me finish. His hands wanted to reach for hers but didn't. I'm not talking about romance. I'm talking about partnership. Legal partnership. The kind that protects both of us. Margaret studied him. That way she had of looking through surface to structure. And if I say yes, what changes? Nothing. Everything. Ben struggled for words. We keep working together, building the business, but we build something else, something that's ours. A family. The word hung between them. Dangerous. Real. Maybe, if you want. Do you want? Ben thought of the empty chairs, the quiet mornings, the sound of Margaret's hammer filling spaces that had been silent too long. Yes. She set down the hammer, walked past him to the stove, poured herself more coffee, added chicory, stirred it with the bent spoon she kept meaning to straighten. Ordinary movements while deciding something extraordinary. All right? All right. We make it real, legal real. But, she turned to face him, I keep working the forge. Of course. Even if, her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. Even if things change. Margaret. Ben did reach for her then. His hands found hers, rough with calluses matching his own. I didn't marry you for decoration. Won't start expecting it now. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, but close. Then yes. Real marriage. Real partnership. And they stood there, hands clasped, the morning sun slanting through the repaired window. Then Margaret pulled back, practical again. The Morrison cultivator won't fix itself. Let it wait an hour. Why? Because you haven't slept in 36 hours. Because we just decided something important. Because... Ben stopped. Because I want to show you something. He led her upstairs. Not to the bedroom they'd been avoiding, but to the smaller room at the end of the hall. His mother's sewing room, closed since her death. The door stuck. Ben shouldered it open. Dust swirled in the morning light. Everything as she'd left it, fabric folded on shelves, thread arranged by color. The sewing machine his father had ordered from Chicago. But in the corner, something covered with a sheet. Ben pulled the sheet away. His mother's rocking chair. The one his father had made as a wedding gift, 40 years ago. Every joint hand-carved, every surface smooth as water, except the back support had split. His father had been meaning to fix it when the sickness came. It's beautiful, Margaret said. It's broken. Everything's broken until it's fixed. She knelt beside the chair, running her hands along the split. Clean break. Good wood. I could. She stopped, looked at him, understanding. You want me to fix this? I want us to fix it. Together. They carried the chair to the workshop. Margaret selected wood glue, clamps, narrow strips of reinforcing steel she'd rolled thin as paper. Ben held pieces while she worked. No forge heat needed here, just patience, precision, and the kind of care that came from touching something that mattered. The chair took shape again, stronger than before at the break points. Margaret added small steel plates, invisible once installed. That would prevent future splits. There. She stepped back. Needs to set overnight, but it'll hold. It's perfect. It's functional. But she was almost smiling. Like us. 6 months later. Snow dusted the ground, but the forge shed stayed warm. Margaret worked the bellows one-handed now, her other hand pressed to her lower back. The curve of her belly showed even through the leather apron. You should rest, Ben said from the doorway. You should stop saying that. She pulled a horseshoe from the fire. Mrs. Patterson's order won't finish itself. 6 months had changed everything and nothing. The forge still rang dawn to dusk. The ranch operated in black ink, now the second mortgage payment made. The third, the fourth. They'd hired help young Tom Williams, eager to learn the trade. Margaret taught him like her father had taught her, one burn at a time. Ben watched her work. Still the same precision, though she moved differently now, compensating for the shifted center of balance. The baby would come in spring, Mrs. Patterson had said. A harvest child, she'd called it. Appropriate. Letter came, Ben said. From Denver. Margaret's hammer paused. The buyer, same lawyer, different message. Ben unfolded the paper. He's withdrawing his interest. Found another property. That's all. There's a postscript. Says, congratulations on your expanding enterprise. Margaret set down the hammer. He knows about the baby. Everyone knows about the baby. You're not exactly hiding it. Hard to hide anything in this county. She pulled off her gloves, pressed both hands to her belly. Moving, always moving. Like the mother. Like the father. You never sit still either. They walked to the house together. Slow. Margaret's hand on his arm for balance on the icy ground. Inside, the kitchen smelled of bread she'd taught him to bake. Finally, his loaves came out lopsided but edible. The rocking chair sat by the window, catching afternoon sun. Margaret lowered herself into it, careful. The joints held solid. 6 months after repair. Read me the account books, she said. You know the numbers. I like hearing them in your voice. Ben fetched the ledger, sat in his chair, not his mother's anymore, but his. They'd found their own arrangement. December income, $43 from repairs, $16 from cattle sales, $8 from eggs. Your chickens are earning their keep. Our chickens. Our chickens. He turned the page. Expenses, coal for the forge, $12, feed, $6, payment on the mortgage, $75. He looked up, leaving $32 clear profit. $32. Margaret rocked slowly. Remember when we were $1 short? Remember when you sold your grandfather's hammer? Great-grandfather. Her hand found his. Remember when we thought this was temporary? Ben squeezed her fingers, calloused still, but familiar now, known. Nothing about us was ever temporary. No. You were always going to stay. I was always going to ask you to. He set down the ledger. We just needed time to figure it out. Margaret laughed, low and quiet. Time and a broken thresher. And a forge that needed lighting. And neighbors who knew when to show up. And a woman who could save a ranch with her own hands. 2 hands, Margaret corrected. Yours and mine. Outside, snow began falling harder. The forge fire had been banked for the night. Tom Williams had gone home to his mother's cooking. The cattle stood sheltered in the barn Ben had reinforced with Margaret's metalwork. In the kitchen, 2 chairs at the table, both occupied, coffee cooling between them, bread rising for tomorrow. Account books showing black ink. Margaret stood, pressed her hands to her back. Help me with something. Ben followed her back to the sewing room. She opened a trunk, not her father's tool trunk, but her mother's. The one thing from her childhood she'd never opened. Inside, wrapped in tissue, baby clothes, tiny gowns yellowed with age. I was saving them, Margaret said, for some day. Some days here. Yes. She lifted a small gown, held it to the light. Needs mending. Everything always needs mending. We're good at that. We are, aren't we? She folded the gown careful, set it aside. Ben, that first day, when I stepped off the stage, were you disappointed? Ben thought about it. The wilted flowers, the brown dress, the practical boots, the way she'd looked past him to the work that needed doing. No, he said, not disappointed, surprised, but not disappointed. I was disappointed, Margaret admitted. I expected someone desperate, got someone strong enough to let me be strong. They stood in the sewing room, surrounded by his mother's things and her mother's things. The past and future tangled together like thread. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the house held warm. "Come on," Ben said. "Supper won't cook itself." "Actually, I set a stew going this morning. When you were at the forge by dawn. I get up earlier now. Baby makes sure of it." They walked downstairs together. The stew bubbled on the stove. Margaret had added vegetables from the root cellar, meat from the smokehouse. Real food. Plenty of it. They ate without talking, comfortable in the silence. After, Ben washed while Margaret dried. Their movements coordinated without thought, like working the forge, like fixing the chair, like everything they did now together, without need for words. Later, Margaret sat in the rocking chair while Ben read from the almanac, planting schedules, weather predictions, the ordinary poetry of farm life. Her hand rested on her belly, his voice carried low and steady. The fire in the stove died to coals. Time for bed. But they sat a moment longer, neither wanting to break the spell of contentment. "Tomorrow," Margaret said finally. "Henderson needs his harrow fixed." "Tomorrow," Ben agreed. "We fix the harrow." They climbed the stairs, to the bedroom they now shared. No longer awkward, no longer separate. Just two people who'd found each other through work and stayed through choice. In the darkness, Margaret spoke once more. "Ben, the advertisement you sent, what did it really say?" "Seeking a wife to share the labor of living." "You found her?" "No," Ben corrected. "She found me." Outside, snow covered the ranch in white. Inside, two people slept close for warmth. In spring, there would be three, but tonight, just two, breathing matched. Hands clasped even in sleep. The forge would ring again come dawn. Iron would bend to will and skill. Debts would be paid. Life would continue. But for now, silence, peace, and two chairs at the table, both finally permanently occupied.